Hi, Stephen. Welcome to World Building Secrets.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for finding the time. I usually like to start with a first question as sort of a little bit of a brain teaser, so take your time. But what was an experience where you learned that language had power?
I think it was the first time I ever wrote an obituary.
Really?
I realized that, since I'm the English major in the family, it fell to me to write an obituary for someone in our family.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that the grammar, the syntax, the punctuation, it has a power. It would be a form of disrespect to get it wrong, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Wow, that's really interesting. Have you ever read anything that made you think differently about fiction?
Oh man, all the time. I wish every book I read made me think differently, but every book I read challenges me in a different way. Let me think. A book that made me, I think a clear memory of feeling that what you're talking about would be back in, this is probably 91, 92, when I read Jeffrey Eugenides's The Virgin Suicides novel.
Okay.
I read that novel all through the 90s. I haven't read it in the 2000s yet, but I probably will. But he told it in kind of royal first person, or like in a Greek chorus voice, a we instead of an I. And that just blew me away. I was so intrigued, intimidated, challenged, and it was just amazing. It really I could feel like the folds in my brain refolding, you know?
Yeah, definitely. When you write, how do you balance between fiction and reality and trying to maintain a realistic storyline, but, tackling some of that impossible?
Yeah, I think I worry more about making the characters' inner emotional states real than I do about making the world real, because if you can get the reader invested in the struggles, regrets, desires, motivations, everything inside that are roiling inside the character, then the world can be a cartoon. It can be a hyper realistic, day after tomorrow science fiction. It can be all kinds of things that they will buy as long as they're invested in the character. So I try to pour all the reality I can into their emotional reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I saw an interview of yours where you said that your favorite horror movie is Scream. Is that still true?
Yeah, it's definitely my favorite slasher.
Slasher?
And let me think. It may be my favorite horror movie. I never really thought about that. Sometimes I say The Ring is my favorite horror movie too.
Okay.
I like that a lot. But yes, I love Scream. I love it because it's got like parodic elements, like it's a parody, but it's also engaging the conventions of the slasher. So it's doing two things at once, and it's balancing them. It's never forgetting that it has to bring the scares. At the same time, it's taking the knees out of the genre. And I think that it displays a high level of skill.
Do you think they've done a good job in developing the plot line as more movies have come out?
Yeah, I mean, you have different directors, different writers, different creators involved, and different eras too. That makes a lot of difference for horror because Scream was the initial Scream trilogy was the late 90s, and all these many years later, us getting 4 and 5 and 6 to come soon, completely different issues, anxieties, and everything. And the horror has to both remain loyal to the kind of build that Scream initiated, while also engaging all these anxieties and stuff we've got today.
Definitely. I had such an interesting experience with Scream. I think it almost jeopardized a little bit of my relationship with horror, because I definitely like it and appreciate it. But I went to like a birthday party when I was 7 years old, a sleepover with a couple girls, and one of them decided to play it.
Wow.
And it scarred me. Me so hard. And I think that I probably instilled a sense of fear in me, where every time I watch a horror now, I can't help but feel like I'm part of the character, and I get scared. How do you ever get scared? I wonder if you still get scared.
I totally get scared, but it sounds like you had like an initial trauma that later horror movies, they kind of like rekindle that trauma.
Definitely. And I think of it a lot, and I remember it so vividly. And I was young.
Oh, yeah. I would say 7 is probably a little young for Scream,
Very young. Very young. And I think it's also one of the first, so they were really went at it with that one.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I definitely get scared. I think if I ever stop getting scared of either horror fiction, horror stories, or horror novels, then maybe I'd drift away from horror. Because the only way I like to write horror is if I am scared. So when I'm writing my own novels, I get scared. It's like I have to invest so completely in the reality. of this world and these characters and these people that I lose the line between this is fake and this is real.
Yeah.
And so that's why I write my novels really quickly. I'm just trying to run through as fast as I can so I can get back to the real world, you know?
Definitely. So horror is obviously a recurring genre in your writing. Do you have a specific relationship with it? Like, why horror?
You know, I mean, number one, I think I'm just hardwired for horror. I write science fiction. I've done some fantasy. I've done literary, but it all kind of, if I just take my hands off the controls for a minute or a second or moment, I always tend towards the eviscerations, the decapitations, the mass slaughter and blood on the walls and everything. That's just kind of where my impulses are. That's kind of what keeps me interested. What I appreciate about horror is the visceral reaction it can kind of elicit from the reader that the reader is not necessarily willing to give. You go into a horror experience, you know, a horror art of some sort, and you're always looking for the monsters on the zippers on the monster's costume. And you can tell yourself, oh, that's fake. I don't have to believe in werewolves. I don't have to believe in demons and possessions and all, but things change at 2 a.m, you know, and you're leaving all the lights on. And that's what I love about horror.
Yeah, definitely. Do you ever test your writing on your friends or family to see?
Not really. No. I mean, I do have, you know, early readers of my stuff, but they're not reading it for, did they get scared? They're really reading it for, this is stupid. You need to cut 80 pages, that kind of stuff. You know?
Editing.
Yeah.
Definitely. Are you quite private when it comes to writing, your writing process?
No, not at all. No? One time I was teaching a online course. This has been probably 10 years ago. And I decided to, like, I'd always heard about Harlan Ellison, placing himself in the front window of a department store with the typewriter and writing a story while everyone watched. And I'm always so jealous of that. I think that would be a blast to do. So the online version of that I did was I wrote a story on our little bulletin board kind of thing we had, and I would just post it as it went. And so it was really weird getting everybody dogpiling like this next paragraph and saying, this is good, this is bad, you should go this way, and I know what's going to happen. And it was, but I made myself read out the comments too. So I just wanted to see if I could do it, you know, and
definitely.
It was fun. It was very, very difficult, but it was very fun.
Awesome. You're a professor as well. How do you think that teaching has maybe changed your approach, or have you learned any valuable lessons from your students?
Yeah, I've definitely learned from my students every single time. I think that's why I keep teaching, is that I learn so much from my students, from the amazing things they can do, and also the stuff they blunder into that I probably would never find out on my own. But what teaching does, well, it does 2 things for me. Number one, it keeps me connected to the world. I think without students telling me, like, I don't know who Adele is or who Kanye West is, then I just listen to my 8 tracks and watch Rockford Files, and I just kind of stay at a train station while the train is leaving, you know?
Yep.
But the students like hold their hands out the window and grab onto me and make me go with them into the future, which is not necessarily where I'm looking to be, but it's good to be there, I think. The second thing that fiction does for me is it keeps me honest. I hear myself articulating, I don't know, techniques or not really rules, but guidelines to students about, you know, always do this, and if you can help it, don't do that, that kind of stuff. And then on my own, when I'm writing, I kind of feel beholden to myself, stick to those guidelines and use those techniques, because otherwise I'm a liar, you know?
Totally. That's incredible. I mean, I think the teaching is, there's so many benefits. And I think having a teacher, I mean, my favorite professors were ones that were really successful in their fields and they had a different way of teaching the topic that they were in, right? I think the experience is super important when it comes to that. Let's change tracks a little bit, and I want to talk about My Heart is a Chainsaw, which has taken the world by storm. Fantastic book, by the way. Read it.
Thank you.
I watched your chat with Kara G, who narrates the audiobook. Damn, did she do a good job?
She did.
She was really good. Really, really good. Can you tell us a little bit about how this book has come to life?
You know, it's funny. I didn't do this on purpose, but it actually comes from virgin suicides.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, look at that.
Yeah, back in 2012, 2013, when I was reading the Virgin Suicides all through the 90s, I kept thinking, this is good, but you know, what if it were more interesting? What if there was somebody with a machete out there? You know, wouldn't that be cooler? And so finally, in 2013, I decided I'm going to do that. And I wrote a version of My Heart is a Chainsaw. It was called Lake Access Only at the time, that was told with like that Greek chorus kind of narrator, but it was a slasher through and through. And I discovered Indian Lake and the sheriff and all kinds of stuff that's in My Heart is a Chainsaw. Had a different protagonist at the time. And Jade Daniels, the main character now, was nowhere in the novel. But
interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, that's like the inception point for My Heart is a Chainsaw, was Jeffrey Eugenides, The Virgin Suicides.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Well, speaking of Jade, the protagonist, for those that haven't read the book, I think she has such a beautifully complex character and personality. And I was wondering, how did you go about developing that personality in her relationship with horror movies as a means of protection and understanding of the environment that she finds herself in?
You know, sometimes I worry that all of my protagonists are just me with a different wig, me with different clothes, me with you know, a different background. And so to a certain extent, that's Jade is me in my own growing up, you know?
Really?
At the same time, I was watching my daughter, who was in high school at the time. I was writing the main part of My Heart is a Chainsaw. And so I think I incorporated some of my daughter as well, like the fieriness, you know, and the perseverance and the insistence. And, but to tell you the truth, it's kind of just, I feel like it's just discovery. With My Heart, like most novels take me like at max 2 months to write. My Heart is a Chainsaw was, I don't want to say it was like 8 years of solid writing. I wrote probably 15 other novels between 2013 and 2020 or 2021.
1,500? Oh my God.
No, 15.
Oh,
yeah.
I heard 1,500. I was like,
yeah, but I mean, they're not all good. They won't all be published, but I'm always like to write. But after I wrote that My Heart is a Chainsaw in 2013, I didn't look at it again until about 2017, 2018. And
interesting.
Started trying to rehab it, and then I hit the ground running pretty hard, and wrote it I wrote it like 2 or 3 completely different ways.
Yeah.
And the result of writing it all these different ways that weren't necessarily complementary sketched out Jade's character for me, and her past and her possible future, her longings, her desires, her regrets, her grievances, all that stuff. And so she became a whole character through just blundering about Indian Lake and Proof Rock, really.
Yeah.
And that's how it always is for me. I know that some writers, like before they put pen to paper on chapter 1, they do a little like exercise. What was this character's 12th birthday party like? You know, what did they most wish their dad had done for them? That kind of stuff.
Right.
You know?
Depicting it.
Yeah. And that's kind of nice. I mean, that probably saves a lot of time, actually. The problem with me is if I ever do that, either with a character or I think with a world, then I feel like the story's already written and I don't have to write it anymore. So I just do something different.
Right. Totally. I mean, I think Jade is just, I think you've beautifully, she's comes across as such a confident, and I think just the fact that she even loves these horror movies and she's so interested with what's going on. But I think it's almost the perfect mask for what she really feels in the relationship with her father. And was that intentional in any way?
I think we all have defensive mechanisms. We all wrap ourselves in whatever is the most comfortable to us. And so Jade, at her like moment of trauma, it's kind of random. If she would have found like Beanie Babies, maybe she would have been Beanie Baby crazy,
Who knows?
She happened to find Bay of Blood, and that altered the course of her life and her perception of the world and all that stuff. And it was lucky for me because I know a lot about horror movies. I don't know nothing about Beanie Babies.
Yeah. How do you, when we touched upon environments, or you touched upon environments a little bit, I was wondering how you go about creating, maybe not with Heart as a Chainsaw, because I know that was a little bit different, but how do you go about creating environments and worlds that your protagonists do live in?
I think there's 2 ways to do that. One way is kind of the George Martin way, where you write 2 or 3 volumes of, this is how this world works. This is its climate, its economy, its culture, its history. And so it inside out. And then you drop your characters in there and the stories kind of produce themselves. And that's got to be pretty cool. And obviously it produces great stuff. What I do is I instead drop my characters into a big blank space, and each step they take, it's like a Miyazaki thing, like the Spirit of the Forest or whatever it is in Princess Mononoke, when that big deer, wherever it steps, like magic happens around it.
It just appears, and
Yeah, and that's how writing feels like for me, wherever my characters go, wherever their decisions take them, that little space around them greens up and becomes vivid. And the trick with writing like that is I go down so many dead alleys, like plot wise and development wise, that I have to back out of those alleys and go a different way, just because that's the way the novel needs to go, or I know it doesn't need to go that way anyways. And but that alley that I went down stays painted. And so by the end of all these blunders and blind alleys, I have created the whole world. I've walked across the whole world, and it's become vivid and real, but it was by exploration, not by pre-planning, if that makes sense.
It's almost like leaving that room for imagination and letting your decision making kind of take like kind of spontaneous decision making rather than trying to plan it all out.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, which isn't to take anything away from the people who do plan it all out, because it seems to work for them. And it
different stylistic choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk a little bit about Earth Divers.
Yeah.
I love how it mixes slasher elements with this time travel to kind of almost experiment how far violence can go, to kind of rewrite history in a way. How far do you think violence can go?
Yeah, that's a big question, huh? You know what I think? I remember somebody told me once, I think this might have been in a religious studies course I was taking. Okay. And I don't know if it's actually real or not. It could have just been a descriptive model or something, but they were talking about, Buddhist in Tibet, like Buddhist villages in Tibet, where, people need to eat, but it also is like a karmic strike against you to kill an animal. And so the dynamic they've come up with over the centuries is to have one person in town who like kills the yak that they're going to eat for a week or two, and that one person gets all the bad karma on him or herself for this life cycle, you know, and
like a sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a pretty, it's kind of like the sin eater model, really, you know, that we all know. But so that's kind of how I see the violence in here. Like Tad is he's like cashing his soul in to try to save the world, you know? Right. But there's also like the question of what is the world worth if you have to cash your soul in, you know?
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
I'm not, the actual like mechanics of time travel aren't that interesting to me, but the ethical dilemmas that it presents are very interesting to me.
Yeah, 100%. Why did you decide to write it as a comic book?
Because I knew that if I had to get the rigging right on a 15th century caravel, that was going to take me 6 pages of boring prose to explain, whereas an artist can do it in one panel. And so it can be, the story can be told so much more economically with visuals, I think.
Definitely. And I think there's a plus in being able to it's easier to take a comic to another medium. Like you've announced that Earth Divers has been sold to 20th Century Fox. Congratulations. That's huge. Yeah. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
How do you see that developing in that kind of, how do you see the story developing in that kind of a medium?
I've been talking with one of the possible showrunners all week about that.
Really?
How many episodes and what do we want to prioritize in the pilot and all that stuff. And, of course, the series, like the comic, will go back and forth between 1492 and 2112. And the trick for television will be how to balance that pacing, that back and forth, you know? And, but I think it, like you were saying, I mean, comic books aren't storyboards for other media, but at the same time, you're right. A comic book script is not that different from a television or a movie script, you know? And I think they do kind of make that adaptive jump fairly easily, you know?
Yeah. Are you going to in any way be involved in the casting process in terms of like, who do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an executive producer, so I'll have some say in that for sure. And,
Makes sense.
You know, of course, people are already asking me, who do you want here? Who do you want there? And it's really a trick of availability and pre-existing contracts, you know?
Yeah. It always comes down to that, unfortunately. But I feel like it'd be really interesting to see who gets to play and really see. Is this the first time that one of your works is going to come to life in this kind of a medium?
Yeah, it is. I've had one of my things turn into a short film, maybe 2. But yeah, I mean, I've gone through the process of development with other projects, but they haven't made it to the screen yet. You know, and who knows if Earth Divers will? But fingers crossed. The comic book is getting wonderful traction in the world, and that always that always makes studio executives kind of perk up,
Definitely. Let's talk about the Universe.
Yeah.
I think our community is going to be really excited to hear what you have to say. Is this the first transmedia project that you've written for, or you're writing for, actually?
Yeah, I've been invited to write for others, but I've never done it. But I know Josh Viola, and I trust him, and so that's why I said yes to this project. I mean, well, I say this is the first I've written for the Predator, franchise. I've written for Zombies versus Robots. I've done a Conan story.
Oh,
maybe
awesome.
One or two, but that's all been like little like putting my toe in the water of that world,
Right. Right.
Like the story I wrote for the Universe, I think it's like 12 or 13,000 words. So it's like not just a foot, it's like both legs,
Yeah. Yeah. It's extensive and it's very good. We can't unfortunately talk about it too much, but they'll find out at some point. When people ask you to write based on their properties, what do you look for?
Mostly who I'm working with. It's not necessarily about the world or the property itself, because I can always make that work. What I can always make work are people. The people are really hard to change to your needs. I don't know why you take the trouble to try to do that, but
very true.
Yeah. So again, it's just because I knew Josh was involved that this would be something good. That's basically why I did it. I didn't know anything about the Universe when he was pitching me to write a story for it.
Oh, so you agreed before you actually read the main story. Yeah. Have you read you've read the main story at this point, of course.
Yeah.
I assume. What are your initial thoughts?
Oh, it's cool. It's both expansive and kind of all encompassing.
Yeah.
What you kind of want from a world or a property is a story space that makes sense,
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to go granular and explain how everything works on this planet, how everything works on that planet. It's more like a backdrop against which basically anything can happen, and hopefully it will.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the intentions behind when they were writing is, they wanted to leave room for the community to have space to create their own work, right?
Yeah.
What kind of opportunities do you think a world like that, or leaving that space, has to offer for aspiring writers? Like if you were a writer on our community, and what kind of opportunities do you think that offers?
Well, for those writers who are world builders, it's really kind of nice to plug in to something where like the physics are already laid down, the physics and almost like the religion too. I mean, I'm not saying that there's a single religion for this whole universe, but it feels like there's that impulse, and
like a backbone.
Which is to say, I feel like it's coming up from the world. Like the world makes enough sense, like piece by piece, domino by domino, gear by gear, that it's like expressing narrative all on its own, if that makes sense.
Yep, definitely. Does your writing process change a lot when it comes to writing short stories in comparison to novels?
No, not really. I think the one difference is that with a novel, I always feel like I have to provide some redemption or rebirth or just a little bit of hope at the end. With short stories, I don't feel that obligation so much, for the reason that a short story, you read it in 30 minutes or an hour and a half. And if at the end, everybody's head blows up, then you're like, well, that was fun. But if everybody's head blows up at the end of a novel, you're like, I invested 3 days of my time in this. This is not fair, So I feel like with a novel, I have to do more of an up ramp at the end, and which isn't to say that all my stories are going to be down at the end. A lot of them are up at the end, but I let that happen when the story goes there itself,
Definitely. How do you have to write when you're writing for the Universe, for example, you're writing about characters that other people are writing about as well. There's a whole anthology, there's comics coming. How do you work with other writers to kind of find a balance, but also maintain your own identity and your own stylistic writing in that?
I guess the most important thing when you're doing any sort of like tie-in or working with somebody else's property is you never want to mess with the canon, you don't want to break it. You kind of want to create a little, like if there's a main hallway, you want to open enough closet doors, and you finally open one where you can work in, and you work in this little side room, and it still has all the rules of the world, but you're not going to derail the bigger narrative.
Totally. 100%. Is there a lot of going back and forth and revising and writing and kind of rewriting and editing and
No, there definitely, for me, there definitely is and was for the thing I did for Universe, and which is, it's good. I mean, it's a lot of work, but that's writing, you know, writing is always a lot of work. And it would be less work if I actually were someone who ever cared about research, you know, if I actually if I made a list of all the rules that I couldn't break. But being a horror writer, I'm never worried about preserving the world. I'm worried about breaking the world, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So when I'm working in somebody else's property, I have to kind of reorient myself against that.
Yeah, I was wondering what the shift was like from horror to suddenly sci-fi, and it's a blossoming world that's just starting to grow. Yeah.
Well, for me, it was a lot of back and forth. You're right, with the people running Universe. So they would say, this is good, but you went totally off the path here, you know, so we need to pull you back. And it was good because basically that was my research.
Yeah,
you know?
Definitely. Yeah. If you had the opportunities to sit in the chair, where would you transport your consciousness to?
Oh, wow. Let me think. And it's instantaneous, so I don't have to worry about time.
Yeah.
A good question. Let me think. I think I'd want to be out of our solar system. I think it'd be neat to plant myself somewhere along Voyager's path. It would be neat to see Voyager skating by.
Okay.
That would feel like a circle closing, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, to close off, I like to ask my guests basically what their world building secrets are. You can think of this as advice or tips or life lessons, anything like that. So Stephen Graham Jones, what is your world building secret?
You know, it's not even mine. I think I picked it up from my dissertation director, Janet Burroway, back in the late 90s. She said, from experience, when you're writing a novel, a project, whatever, do all the research you can. Yes, if you're writing about 14th century monasteries, and you have to world build that monastery to be real, and the scrolls and the candles and all that stuff. And do every bit of research you can so that you know it in a granular sense. But the important thing is never write anything down, because otherwise you end up with a stack of 300 index cards, and then you feel obligated to go through those index cards and include this and include this and include this, and it becomes kind of didactic and boring.
Interesting.
Rather let it accumulate in your head, and the stuff that actually needs to be on the page will come out all on its own. So I think how that would apply to world building is, yes, know the climate, the culture, the economy, the history, all that stuff, but don't necessarily have a big document that you have to refer to. To me, that's not helpful.
Leave that room for imagination.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And I'm really excited to see where everything goes.
It was great talking to you. Thank you.